Welcome back to the Be a Man podcast, where we encourage men to be better men. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Be a Man podcast. I appreciate you coming on and listening today. I have a wonderful interview for you lined up here with Kipp. He's part of the Order of Man network, and I'm sure many of you have heard of him, but we have an awesome conversation about manhood, some things we see in culture right now, some challenges, this whole concept of victimhood and taking responsibility, and just how victimhood looks every day, and whether we realize it or not, whether we're passing the buck or not, and the responsibilities we need to take and we need to see men take in our culture. We can either make excuses or we can accept the challenge and be part of the change that we need to really see right now. I believe many of us would agree on that. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. I know you will. You will enjoy this conversation because I was challenged, I was encouraged, and I think you will as well. And most of all, I think it's going to encourage you to be a better man. Before I forget, go check out the store or the links in the description. There you can pick up some gear before Christmas if you'd like. I'm humbled by all that. The links are in there. Go on YouTube, hit subscribe. We're passing out videos every Tuesday and Thursday. I think it's, and I'm hoping to, do even more. I've got several interviews lined up with even more people, and I think you're going to really enjoy them as the new year hits as well. We've got some financial things, some working out things. I think you're really going to enjoy it. So go over there, hit subscribe, hit that little bell. You'll get notified every time there's a new episode. Go ahead and like it and leave a comment. I love that. I love interacting with you. And go ahead, and if you're a podcast listener, hit the review button, 5-star. If you think it is worth it, I appreciate it. And go ahead and, most of all, share a friend or share with a friend. I want to get the word out. I want to encourage men to be better men. That's the goal. I think all of you have a message. I think all of you have some way that you can grow and you can challenge others. Maybe somebody's struggling with something and we deal with it. Go share it. I appreciate it, but I think the person that will listen to it will appreciate it even more. And so go ahead, go over there, share the video, share the podcast links, do all that on the socials. And if you want to follow me, all that's on there as well. And if you want to interact, go shoot me a DM on Instagram or Twitter. Either one's fine. Those are the two I check the most. I will get back to you as soon as possible. I'm usually pretty quick on those things, but I'm also working on a few more things for 2023 website. I'm debating starting a Facebook group where we can have more conversations, more interactions, and some other things I'm working towards, maybe a weekly. Here's 5 links or 5 things or 3 things that I saw this week that you might find beneficial or helpful in your pursuit in becoming a better man. All those things I think will be super encouraging to you. I know I enjoy those things, so I think you will as well, or at least I hope you will as well. But so look for that for the new year. I think we're just getting started here. I'm looking forward to the future, and I appreciate you coming along on the journey. But most of all, go share it, go tell a friend. Let's spread the word, and let's encourage other men to be better men. But with that, let's get into it. All right, welcome back to the podcast. I appreciate you being here, Kipp. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell people who you are.
Yeah. In fact, it's funny. I don't get to introduce myself very often. I get pigeonholed into, the Order of Man podcast. But so Kipp Sorensen, I'm actually the chief people officer for a consulting firm here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm over all things people, which is a little bit around accelerated learning development, leadership development, and really that driving factor behind company culture. And then I help contribute on the side on the Order of Man podcast, and we do a weekly show there called the Ask Me Anything, and I get to read off and slaughter people's names when I read them off and give you my opinion. So whether you want it or not.
Well, I have an easy one. Justin and Smith, probably two of the most common names out there.
Yeah.
So that's an easy one. Yeah. So people, you're in charge of people. See, that sounds like a huge responsibility. So how have you seen over these last few years that dynamic, people interactions, people, just their whole demeanor? Because I think we've all seen it, but how have you seen it as in your particular role?
Yeah, I mean, here's the good part. Our culture is pretty amazing where I'm at, but we keep it that way, and we have to fight to keep it that way.
Yeah.
And I think there's a number of things that kind of drive a company's culture that are aligned with, let's just say, human behavior, natural tendencies that we have to constantly fight against. And so we can have a great culture today. It could be amazing, and we could lose it with the same people that we have, because the ability or the desire to take ownership and not be a victim and to push blame on other people, all those things kind of come natural. And if we don't constantly fight for that kind of way of being within our organizations, we'll certainly lose it. And so, and maybe what might be valuable to your listeners is, like, when I say like a good culture, let me paraphrase that. So an environment by which our employees are self-directed to do their jobs and to bring their talents to the table. That is a winning culture, in my opinion. Not micromanaged, not coerced, not belittled, not any of that, where employees are self-directed, meaning that their jobs, they actually look forward to doing, that they actually like do the right job because we trust them to do the right job. And our job as leadership is to support them in bringing their talents to the table, not to diminish them, not to coerce them or anything else. We're not about micromanagement, and we believe in our people and we believe in their talents, and we're there to support them in that process.
It's really cool. Yeah. So are you a maximize what people are good at type person, or are you a, people are weak in this area, so we maximize that, but broken. Then you,
Yeah, that's a good question. So, all transparency, I would say that I used to be, what are people's shortcomings, and let's fix their shortcomings. But over probably the last year and a half, statistically, that's not the best move. So let's assume, Justin, that you have a shortcoming, unless that shortcoming is somewhat toxic, right? Like, let's just say it's not a strong area of yours, but it's not to the extent that it's like creating a negative result. You're actually better off focusing on your strengths as an individual and as a leader than you do actually on your shortcomings. The perfect example of this, and by the way, society gives us passes. So let me give you a perfect example. Let's use Steve Jobs as an example, right? We could all paraphrase and say Steve Jobs was an amazing CEO of Apple, right? Well, the guy was a complete asshole.
Yes.
He was a complete asshole. So why does he get a pass for being an asshole? Because he was brilliant in other areas. And we kind of look past certain shortcomings when we're extraordinary in other areas. And so there's huge power in identifying those areas that you're already great and becoming extraordinary in them. Now, once again, right, if you're untrustworthy and you're toxic, you know what I mean? Those shortcomings are not going to work, right? But if it's like, Kipp's not good in this little area, we're better at maximizing an individual's strengths than we are trying to shore up and be mediocre across the board.
Yeah. That's really good, because I've seen that shift in kind of leadership circles lately, is that there's an emphasis on maximizing your strengths, and it makes sense. And I've tried to start developing and focusing more on those areas than my weaknesses for that reason. Is if I can maximize this, then I'm going to, help those around me better. And I mean, that's part of being a leader. So
Yeah, totally. And if you don't mind me adding really quick, for those that are religious, they might look at this and say, well, these are your God-given talents. So this isn't about shortcomings, right? And what you're great at and shortcomings. It's more about what are the talents that you have as an individual, and let's maximize those talents and those gifts that you have. Right. So, you know what I mean? There's a negative way of looking at it, but there's also a very positive way. Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make that distinction.
No, that's good. Yeah. I think I get asked about that a lot. So I'm glad you touched on that, because I'm starting to get questions about 2023, things to look forward to, things to focus on. What are some things you are personally, and then also trying to get people you work with to really work on, especially men, to really focus on in this coming year?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the first thing for me, let me focus on me first, and then I'll share kind of some of the things that we're focused on, making available for men. So the first thing for me is getting clear on actually those talents, right? What is my leadership brand, and what are the things that I'm really good at? And how do I maximize those areas? Now, one thing that I find interesting that you guys might think is interesting, at least, is my strengths are also my weaknesses. Okay. So I'll give you a perfect example. Without a doubt, if you took a survey of me as an individual from a leadership perspective, number one thing that you would constantly see over and over is passion, right? Without a doubt, everyone goes, oh, Kipp's so intense and he's so passionate about what he is. And we get buy-in and people get behind him because of the way he communicates. And it's not because I'm trying to be manipulative on my communication. I just really believe what I'm talking about. And it kind of shows up in my communication so people get along, right? And I can create some movement and some waves with whatever it is that I'm about. Yeah. Well, ironically enough, that same thing comes across as arrogant, self-centered, know-it-all. And so I have to be mindful of that, right? And I have to go, okay, geez, like, here's a strength, but if used too much, then I'm not being open to what Justin has to say. I'm not being open to what other people have to say. I may not even ask them what they think because I'm so passionate about the way it should be done. And I'm coming across overly arrogant, right? And so it's really interesting. And those things have been a little bit more on my radar of late. And so that's kind of a real focus of me, is what are those strengths, but also how do I mitigate some of those potential weaknesses that are tied to my strengths for this given year.
Yeah, it made me think of that episode of The Office. I don't know if you were a fan when Michael goes in to see David Wallace and he's like, asking him what his weaknesses are or his strengths are. And he starts listing off all these things. He's like, well, that's actually my strengths. And, it's a funny episode. Yeah. There's an Office quote for everything, but oh,
I love the
great
Office,
show.
Actually.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm thinking, my channel's geared towards manhood, seeing men, encouraging men to become better men. So what are some specific, identifying your talents? What are some other ways that men can, because here's a little background so you know where I'm coming from. I don't think 2023 from a cultural standpoint, inflation's up, all those other factors that go into things that you are fully aware of. There's some people that are a little uneasy and they're a little nervous. And I think it's an opportunity though for men to step up and rise up, but they're going to have to make some sacrifices and they're going to have to make some decisions. So what are some things you would suggest they really start focusing on? Yeah.
So I would really be focusing on how we show up and really owning things, right? Like, and I have to let me explain a little bit, because don't be a victim in any way. So if the job isn't going well, then change the job. Or if you don't like the position that we're in our current jobs, then amplify whatever it is that you're doing and cause people to see the value that you're bringing to the table. It blows my mind how often that I even have employees that I feel are fully capable, right? They're capable of greatness, but they don't get it, or they're unwilling to do the necessary work to amplify it. And sometimes, even on the podcast, we'll talk about like, alignment of what's important to you and your job or whatever. And we have a tendency, like, even think about side hustles. How many times have you heard guys about, I'm working on my side hustle? Like, it's like this positive thing, right? Yeah. And I can't help but wonder how many guys that have their quote unquote side hustle going have opportunities in their jobs today that they could amplify and take advantage of, but they're not, because it's disguised under the label of work. And sometimes, guys, we just need to bust ass and put in some solid work and have some discipline and show up powerfully, and opportunities will present themselves. We have a tendency to take the easy route and think, my side hustle will give me success, or this other job will give me success. Or meanwhile, opportunities are just laying around asking for us to take advantage of them, but they're too hard. Yeah. So we don't go after them. So I think for me, it's just take some ownership. You don't like your marriage, take ownership. You don't like the way your kids and your family or your family situation is, take ownership, change it. You don't like your job, change it. Like it does. We are in so much control, and our impact to even control our neighborhoods and how we show up is so far more powerful than we realize. But yet we have a tendency, and I do think this is human behavior, is to sit back and think our circumstances will dictate this for us, or they need to change for us to change first. And we need to go first as men. We need to go first as leaders if we want to see the change that we want to see.
That's good.
Sorry, I could go all day.
That's good.
Even think politics. I made this post the other day about politics. All right, are you done voting? Now go out and make some change. Like everyone votes like that's going to be the change. Once I vote this person in, then society is going to change. Guess what? You don't like your government right now. It's because the people are screwed up, that we've gotten to a point where we're electing these kind of people. That's the dilemma. You don't like some moral issues happening in society. Government's not the answer. Really?
You're right.
And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about a leadership perspective. We do this all the time, even as leaders, right? We'll be like, we want our people to be what? Self-directed, right? And then we'll sometimes get middle management going, hey, I wish upper leadership would give us, dictate, like tell us what we need to do. And then we have to pause and go, do you really want us to control what you do? Or do you actually want to just be empowered to make the right decision? Be careful what we're asking for. And a lot of the issues that we have are issues in the home and in families. You want to make a difference, then start making a difference.
Yeah, I go touch on that, because I talk about this a lot, and because I think it's this whole victimhood, not taking responsibility, has been around for a long time. And I trace it back to the everyone gets a trophy, nobody's at fault, nobody loses, that sort of thing. And it's created a culture where we can't tell anybody no. We can't accept that we may have done something wrong. And I do trace it back to the fall of the family structure, I think, has a huge impact on it. And I mean, go down that rabbit hole that you were getting ready to go down there.
Yeah. So and I might take a little bit different angle on this. It'll be fun. Let me know what you think.
Yeah.
So I actually think that the majority of victimhood is a result of us relinquishing our power because we don't want to take accountability for something that we're out of integrity with. Let me give you an example, and I can spew a bunch of resources in this area if you'd like.
Yeah.
But let me give you an example. I have a 4-year-old son. When he was barely born, right? He's like 1 or whatever. As we all know, anybody that's a father, it's like, you're not getting sleep, right? For the first year, because this kid's crying all the time, right? And this is not my first rodeo. This is my 6th child, right?
Okay.
Now here's the deal. Every single time he would cry in the middle of the night, it would wake me up. Doesn't wake up his mom because she's a better sleeper than I am, but it wakes me up. And I am faced with the decision. What's my decision? I get up, right? And go grab him. I can make him a bottle. I can cuddle him. I can give him his binky. There's a number of things. If we're breastfeeding or whatever, I could grab him and bring him to the room. I mean, there's many things I could do. If I were presiding properly in that situation, I could get up and do something. Now, here's the deal. What if I don't? What do I have to do? If I lay in my bed and I go, oh, man, she get up and grab the kid, right? And I don't. The next thing, once I decided to betray myself, the next thing I need to do is what? Justify it. Because when we don't do what we know we should do, we have to justify it. We have to correct the behavior and restore our integrity, or we have to perpetuate the lie that justified the lack of action. And everyone's like, holy crap, man, Kipp, you're thinking this hardcore. But listen to me, okay? So in that example, I don't grab my son. And so I go, and what's the story? What's some ideas of stories I might come up with, right? Like, well, I got to get up early, right? Like, you know, I got to get up at 5 and my wife can sleep in so she can, you know, she should get up, right? Or I come up with the justifications. And here's the irony, Justin. Most justifications that we come up for a lack of action is a finger pointing towards someone else. And so, and once I blame my wife, once I go, well, she's the one that has the flexibility of her schedule, right? She could take naps during the day. I can't, right? And so you could listen to the story. Oh, woe is me. And she's the lucky one. And I start creating this collusion about all because I didn't want to get out of my bed and go grab the baby. And then I start creating a perception of how I see my wife, and I start creating a perception of how I see myself. And I will hold on to that until I correct it. Now, that's a minor example, but imagine how many people in their lives hold on to a grudge with a family member, and 20 years later, they haven't talked to mom or dad or a sibling. And why? How do they justify not talking to them? They justify it by continuing the story, right? And it's a portrayal, and it's usually a lie, right? That they're this way or whatever. And we'll enlist people. I'll call you up, Justin, and go, oh, man, you can't believe my mom, she did blah, blah. And you'll do the typical thing, what most people do. You're right, man. You're justified in feeling that way. And I'll keep it going, right? So I can keep justifying my lack of action in that relationship. How many men, get more serious here, how many men probably justify looking at pornography, for instance? And you don't think they're blaming their wives for it? Of course they're blaming their wives. Well, this is her fault, right? I'm justifying my action because of, lack of her wanting to be intimate or whatever, right? And so, and if you look into that realm of justifications, who's control, who's taking ownership, and who's a victim? As long as we're blaming and saying that I am doing X because of someone else, I am officially taking the stance of victimhood, because it is too hard for me to take accountability and own the fact that my life is exactly the way it is because that is what I have created. And we did an event in Maine last year, and I asked this question to all the guys in the event. I said, by a raise of hands, who all believes that if their wife showed up differently in their relationship, their marriage would be better? So who has the power in that circumstance? Who's the victim in that circumstance? All the men that raised their hands. They're not taking ownership over the circumstance. They're saying, oh, well, if she did something, then I would, or you know what I mean? And then it's always someone else, because we would rather push the blame than to take accountability. Yeah,
that's really good. I see exactly where you're coming at. So let's say someone's struggling with this. What's the first step to take? I mean, yes, admitting that you're being a victim, but I think people, they get in this pattern, and it's kind of a downward spiral, and they don't feel like they can get out of it. What's that step they can start taking today that would get them out of that?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is, and I made a post on my Instagram actually just the other day, and I wholeheartedly believe this. In fact, I have not seen where this is not true. Okay, so let me start there, and then I'll explain it. So usually there's an upset. You're upset. You're emotionally triggered and upset about something. The minute that you're upset, it's actually one of three things. You're out of integrity, and you're justifying it, and you're blaming or you're being a victim in some type of way. Number two, you're not expressing something that should be expressed, which is a form of being out of integrity, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I know I need to clear something up with you, Justin, and I don't, I'm out of integrity because I'm betraying myself, right? I know I should have. And number three is you have some expectation that was not met, and you won't let that shit go because that expectation is it shouldn't be this way, or it should not be this way, or it should, you know what I mean? And you won't let it go because you want to hold on to the judgment that you're right? And that you don't want to deal in reality.
Yeah.
Okay. So in all three of those circumstances, there's a lie and there's an upset of some sort. And so I think step number one is realize that there's an upset. And what I mean by upset is there's something, a way that it's been expressed to me in the past that I really like is something's incomplete. Something's left incomplete.
Yeah.
And we all know that, right? Like we have relationships that we know is like, it's not complete. There's things not said. Yeah. Things have not been restored, or I haven't addressed something. So a lot of those circumstances, something is incomplete. And that's the first trigger, right? To at least be aware of it. And then the second is get present to the lie. I'm trying to think of a good example here. Give me 1 minute.
Yeah.
Okay, here you go. So it sounds cheesy, but it is what it is. Okay. So I'm busy all day. I like order, especially if my day is chaotic and I come home, order is like a sense of peace. Okay. But if I come home and it's not order and it's like chaos because the kids were chaotic and maybe my wife was having a bad day or she had all this stuff and I come home and it's just like, more triggers, right?
Yeah.
But really think about it. Why am I mad? Like really, why am I mad? Yeah. And in most cases, when we are upset about something, it usually, if you ask yourself enough whys, it's not about the house being orderly. It's not about the kids not doing their things. It actually usually results in some interpretation that you're making about yourself. It usually comes back to you. And for me, what that looks like most of the time is that I'm not appreciated and I'm not respected. Now, that's the lie. Right? I could ask my wife and go, hey, do you appreciate me? And she'd be like, oh yeah, I totally appreciate you. Okay. Well, who said that I'm not being appreciated? Yeah. I am. Yeah. And I'm taking A, and my perception of A is that it means that I'm not appreciated and valued. That's the lie. Yeah. And so get present to the trigger and then get present to the lie and ask yourself, is that true? Let me use a more extreme version, if you don't mind, actually.
Sure.
So I've had this analogy. I've used this. This has come up. We have the Iron Council. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, Justin, but we months, probably years ago, actually, now that I think about it, years ago, we're touching one of the conversations around getting complete with a parent that has passed away. And this particular brother had a broken relationship with his dad, never got complete, and dad has passed away. And he was like, how do I resolve that relationship, right, with my dad when he's dead, right, when he's gone? And I asked him, I'm like, well, what does get complete with your dad, what does that look like really, right? And he explains, I have all these things I want to tell him, right? I want to tell him that I'm upset that he did X and Y and this and that. And I want to dump all my emotions on him, right? Yeah. And then you would have to ask yourself, you're like, okay, and what is that going to do? And then second question you have to ask yourself is, what did you make all that stuff mean? So where's the difference between your dad's actions and your interpretation of that. And I'll go extreme here. Even people that are like, man, my parents didn't love me because they beat me or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that possible that they actually loved you and beat you? Is it your interpretation that you weren't valuable enough and thus that's why they did that? Trust me, there's a big difference between the actions of other individuals and our interpretations of what it meant. And if we want to get complete with someone, we actually need to own our interpretation. So if I was going to get complete with my dad that actually passed away this past February, I don't need him to get complete because the person that's incomplete in that relationship is me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had the opportunity to actually talk with my dad right now, what I should be doing is not pointing out the faults that he had as a man, but what I should be doing is apologizing for maybe the love that I withhold from him because of my interpretations of his actions. And actually owning my emotions and how I showed up in the relationship allows me to be complete, because we can't change people, right? We can't change our parents. We can't change their mindsets. How's this? The only choice you have is accept them exactly the way they are.
Yeah.
And that's a choice that you have. Everything else you have to own. And so get present to the triggers, get present to the lie that you're telling yourself that's not actually true, and then restore your integrity.
And that's really good. You're hitting on something that is huge right now. I think just in our culture in general, but just some real issues I think a lot of people are going through. And one thing I like about, and I'm a regular listener, so one thing I like that you guys do is you tend to always bring it back to the home and personal responsibility. And that is something that I don't know when it stopped. It seemed like, maybe pre-World War II, a little bit after, that was still present, but at some point it stopped. Do you know, like, have you kind of pinpointed when all that happened? I don't know if it was like 60s, 70s, that whole hippie kind of movement or what, but it's like at some point it just started to fade and this whole level of personal responsibility just faded.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know historically like why that is, but look at even, Revolutionary War period, right? One of George Washington's top complaints as a general, right, over the Union Army was the fact that men would just get up and leave. And why? Because they were free men. He complained about it. And I love George Washington, don't get me wrong, but these were guys like, hey, I'm a farmer. I have a family. I have crops. I have shit to do. Hey, you know what, George, I'll fight with you, but come April, man, I got a jet because I got stuff to do, right? Like, I'm not beholden to you.
Yeah.
I'm a free man. And I think over time, as government, to be frank, as government takes on bigger control, and as we collectively start living in bigger cities where we're more dependent on other individuals, that I think that thought process has eroded. It really has. I mean, even think like you and I, are we totally sovereign? Not really. No. Walmart provides me half my food. Like, you know what I mean? I'm highly dependent on other individuals. So I'm even removed from what it means to really take ownership for my safety and for my food and providing for my family. It's almost like, it's like the analogy is like people will spend more money if they use a credit card versus if they use cash. Like, we've removed ourselves from the foundational things that keep us alive. And in that process, we've become, I don't know, more victimish, right? Where we're kind of like, well, I got to rely on these people for these things. And that becomes more common ground. I don't know.
Yeah. It's kind of like that,
I have no
quote.
idea.
Yeah. It's like that quote where, good times create weak men. And I think maybe we are starting to live in that a little bit. And we need, some hard times to create and bring out the hard men, the good men again. And I think maybe we're starting to see that just a little bit as things like this, what you guys do, what others do, it starts catching on and men start seeing that they have a responsibility and they're They're stepping up to the challenge, which brings me to a question I ask everyone who comes on. In your opinion, and I know this because I've heard you say it, but others listening may not, but what is the essence of manhood in your opinion?
So I think, and the analogy I use my boys, especially for my boys, let me pause for 1 second really quick. Whether good or bad, right? Socially, it is unfair. And any guy listening right now that feels like, they're being demonized for being men, it's the complete opposite. Here's the reality. You want equality and fairness, then who's going off to war? Who gets celebrated to die on behalf of other people? Do we do that for everybody? No, we do that only for you. We expect you to do that, but we don't expect women to do that. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad, but what I'm ultimately saying is the expectations on a man, whether you like it or not, is unfair. Now, here's the manly thing to do. We don't complain about it. We don't sit back and go, whoa, it's so unfair and woe is us. No, we rise to the occasion because that is what we're good at. And that's what men do. Now, with that said, what I've told my boys in the past is, as they're young boys, they're takers, right? They're consumers. They're sucking me out of resources and money, and they leave the lights on, and to be like, they're not providing, they're contributing zero. Yeah. In fact, they're in the negative, right? and manhood, in my opinion, is when we've moved beyond ourselves. When we have actually taken the mantle of manhood is when we show up day in and day out, that it's not about my joys. It's not about my dopamine dump. It's not about my happiness. What it's actually about is about those that are in my realm of influence and that I've chosen to take care of. Now, don't get me wrong, because I want to be really clear. This doesn't mean that like I've avoided the fact that I need to take care of myself, right? And that I need my own outlets and those things. That's not what I'm saying. But a lot of how I show up as a man is something greater than myself. And there's different levels of that, right? We might have some young men that are like first-time dads and they have a wife, and their level of focus right now in service is their kid and their wife. And then their guys might be like, hey, I got home tackled, like Jordan Peterson would say, take care of home first before you go trying to change the world. And guys have moved past the home, and now they're focusing on community or other areas where they can make a positive influence. But the point is, it's not about us. It's about us more or less checking our egos and making it something about bigger than ourselves.
That's good. I ask that to everybody, and I love that answer, because it is the essence of manhood in many ways is sacrifice and or service, kind of the same thing there.
Yeah. And let's be frank, like this isn't just all negative town. That's where fulfillment is.
Yeah.
That's how you die feeling like you lived a good life.
Yeah.
That's how you live a good life.
Yeah. It's like, Christmas is coming up. I don't necessarily enjoy opening gifts anymore. You know what I mean? Once you hit a certain age, you're like, yeah, it is what it is. Yeah. But what I do enjoy is watching all my kids open all their stuff, and the huge smiles and all those things. And it's just a picture of what that sacrifice and the joy it can bring to your life. Oh. Not that it's always easy. It's usually not, but it's worth it. And that's really good. I think guys are going to be challenged by that. But hey, I know you have time restraints, so I want to take you all night. Where can people find you?
Yeah. So, you could connect with me on Instagram primarily. Maybe I'm old. I'm dating myself to say even the word Facebook. I do use Facebook, but I don't know if anyone follows me necessarily on Facebook, but you can connect with me on Instagram at Kipp Sorensen. So that's KippSorensen. And of course, you can connect also with Order of Man using that same exact handle on the podcast that we do each week.
Yeah. And I'll leave all that. I'm sure most of my listeners know those links, but I will share those as well. But I wanted to give you the last word here. What's a challenge to guys? It can be just about anything.
Yeah.
It can be for the new year. It can be something to do tomorrow, but leave a challenge with the guys.
Yeah. I think my challenge would be, how's this? I think far too often we have a tendency to want things and we don't get clear on the price. And there's a price that must be paid for all things. So if you want to be great at something, what are you willing to pay the price for to be great? And so my challenge would be a high performer in your work, in your social circles, in your families, and get present, not just want those things, right? Because that's weak. That's what weak men do. Oh, I want these things. Oh, right, great. What are you going to do about it? And not only what are you going to do, what's the price you're willing to pay to be an amazing father, to be an amazing husband, to be an amazing employee, and to make a difference in your social circles? What are you going to pay the price for? And it's only then will you actually take the necessary action, because you're going to have the clarity of what it's going to take, and you will have to sacrifice. Otherwise, you better be content with being mediocre.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a good challenge. I think guys are going to, I know me personally, I take these things to heart, and I created this whole thing to encourage other guys, but I find myself encouraged and challenged to make changes, and that's
totally
huge responsibility. And I am humbled every time I talk to somebody, because I get everyone. I mean, most guys, they have a general understanding when they come on here about manhood. We're not too far off ever, but there's always a different angle somebody takes, and it just hits you kind of just a little different. And it's good for guys.
Yeah. And we don't know what we don't know, right? Like, I asked you that same question like 2 years ago, and your answer would be different than it is today, right? We're always constantly evolving. And that's why it's so critical that we're constantly evolving, right? Because if we're not growing, then you're not going to know, like, what's the analogy Ryan and I use all the time, is like, when you're hiking for a peak, you don't know the other peak on the other side of that mountain until you get over that ridge.
Yeah.
And so you don't know what you don't know until you get there. And thus it requires action continually on our part, right? For growth to occur.
Yeah. That's really good. Yeah. Well, Kipp, I really appreciate you coming on, man. I really do. I've enjoyed this so much. We'll have to do it again. I have so many other questions just from this conversation that.
Yeah. And I didn't even bring up jiu-jitsu, which is like impossible, by the way. Yeah.
I've been jotting some stuff down here. I'm like, I have so many questions that I just, and some of them I know because I've heard you guys, but there's a lot of my listeners, and I've had an influx of younger guys recently, and it's really cool to see that. And just because, that whole millennial or whatever the next group is, you don't think of them as wanting these challenges, wanting to face these things yet. But I'm starting to see a little bit of a change in a lot of young people that want these. And I work with a lot of teenagers, so that helps too. And I get to see those challenges they're facing, but I think they're going to be really encouraged by this, and I really appreciate it. I'd love to do it again sometime, and I appreciate all you do. I'm grateful for you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Justin. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah.